My brain is not at peace as of late. That is why I haven't been able to record this review. I finished Divine Blue Light around June 30, I believe, June 30th. As of today, it's July 5th. As I said earlier, it's because my brain is not at peace, but with what I mean there, I'm trying to say that it feels as though my neurons are just breakdancing. Every little thing is getting on my nerves. I'm irritable, but I'm not rude about it, is what I'm thinking about. But anyhow, I feel determined, and yeah, let's see how this goes. Hello and welcome to Swallowing Paper. Today I'd like to thank a particular Stacy from City Lights Books for sending me this copy of Alexander's Divine Blue Light, which, to my surprise, lives up to the name of its series, the Pocket Poet series. It's easy to take with you for reading on the go or in between those moments of idleness a little before sleep. That is, these volumes are antidotes for doom scrolling. And I've never used that phrase before, doom scrolling, but I thought it was fitting. Prior to my reading of this collection, I'd initially heard about Alexander via articles concerning his collection above the human nerve domain, which is out of print and runs for a pretty penny and has little to no chance of appearing in print a second time. I've read a couple of his poems and had no idea what I was looking at. This is something I'm going to talk about further in the review, just bear with me. And I think it's apt to say I was turned away from looking at his writing, but even then, the thought lingered as a faint interest. Since then, Will Alexander became a finalist for the Pulitzer. I explored poetry further than my comfort had allowed me to, and I became much more acquainted with life and the work of art. Which just means that the future is now. And when I'd noticed this, I realized that my interest in Will's poetry has never faltered. On the contrary, it doubled in my learning. And you may ask, what is it about his poetry that'll make one wonder what it is they're reading? And the thing about Will is that he's characterized as a surrealist poet, and for good reason. And there's a technique in this realm of letters in which the writer suppresses rationality or rational thought and begins to write anything that comes to mind, creating an onslaught of words and special orders unique to the mind of whoever is writing them, and whoever's thinking the thoughts. In Will's case, he's deeply embedded in alchemy, the occult, the dismantling of colonialism, geography, geology, sometimes even mathematics. In some, every poem is his brain vomiting on the page in rhythm. And sometimes you may even glean a sliver of theme in his poetry, with the main ones in his collection being the titular Divine Blue Light for John Coltrane, Condone to Disappearance for Ferdinando Pessoa, and Imprecation as Mirage, Tarun Kampur in Belgium, which I learned is a poem written about someone of Alexander's invention, a persona. And while there are other poems that feature a light theme in them, I rather pluck the more obvious ones to make this point. Thus, his poems mesh the terminologies of several different disciplines and modes of thought, and what you get is an oftentimes synesthetic quality when reading. Here's an example of one of my favorite poems in the Divine Blue Light collection, by the name of Oniric Liminal Memo, and I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I wrote the entire poem in a script, but I'm just going to read from my book. Facing terse argumentative neural confrontation, poised against self-inflicting ozone assaulted while living in my crazed silo of indifference, knowing its void to be magically elevated, as resonant chimera, as if fire were to erupt from sub-consistent mountain ranges, as erring, fabulous, knowing my figment to be nothing other than transactional scintillation. Writing in free verse, his poetry features very little punctuation, so your reading depends entirely on the rhythm and on occasional breaks and indentation. Will Alexander resorts to the British English spelling of words, and to be frank, I like it as well, but not as much as Will loves the appearance of words with Greek and Latin roots. And having completed the collection, there are things I've noticed that he fixates on, aside from the sciences and studies which inform his vocabulary. But the main thing is that his poems, while spontaneous, often feature things doing things into themselves, as though his poems are narrating the metempsychosis of a substance, or their metamorphosis occurring at random. Because of his automatism, which is the word used to describe the surrealist automatic writing technique, he tends to reuse words, and thus it reads as though Alexander is giving these words different meanings than what has already been ascribed in their etymology, showcasing this awareness of the impermanent nature of meaning by giving a word his own. And tying back to the synesthetic qualities I mentioned, it often feels like Alexander's communicating thoughts that don't have words yet, which, to be frank, isn't a stretch considering that these poems aren't premeditated, occurring as they go without a second thought. As is usual when doing research on Will Alexander, I've read various articles written in the, say, criticism of his poetry, which often sing the same tune, that being that Alexander's poems are nonsense, that he's only published because they're difficult to draw meaning from, because they look smart. Otherwise, they're just calling them pretentious. And while I can see things from their points of view, I can't exactly agree with them. Setting my appreciation aside, poets like Edward Lear, C.S. Lewis, for example, wrote famous self-proclaimed gibberish, with Lear calling himself a writer of nonsenses, and I've never seen anyone up in arms about them. Rather, the two are celebrated for their contributions, and they're often called fun, as they should be. Hello, as I was editing the audio, I realized that the microphone farted on this section, and it skipped whatever I was saying for a bit, but I believe this cynicism stems from his nomination for the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, as when people are nominated for things of that nature, the world gravitates to their material and searches the room for smoke and mirrors, as they should. But if you're going to criticize something, it's always good to do your due diligence and read up on what you're talking about, because otherwise people understand that you don't know what you're talking about. That being said, while I thought the collection was nice, I would caution against trying to read it with the same speed as you would a novel, because yes, it will exhaust you, as it's a work one is meant to spend their time with as though it were the most conventional collection of poetry. You could look at this collection and his others as experiments with language, but if you do that, it'll only reduce your appreciation as something lesser than the full spectrum of what Alexander's offering you. Yes, it's an experiment, but it's also poetry, and I found myself enjoying it most when reading it on its own and taking my time with it, the best way to enjoy any book of poetry, unless it's just not for you. In that case, that's okay too. The best way to describe it without stripping the poems of their individuality, without comparing them to the works of other poets, is to think of them as though Cocteau Twins lyrics if they were lines taken from a sci-fi novel. A really dense one, and I also recognized the irony between not trying to strip it of their individuality than dropping a comparison, but if you know about the Cocteau Twins, then you'd understand. Whether you see it as a guy having fun with words, or as someone subverting your eccentric literary standards, or maybe even some amalgamation of both, there's something for everyone in this poetry, even if the only thing you get from it is madness. I'll end the video with a fragment from one of Will's poems in Divine Blue Light, which I think further explains things for anyone looking to get into his writing, in his own words. Language, not assembled embitterment, or ruse, or disjunctive gesture, but alive, peering into itself, as honed emblem, replete with transformative monsters.